It is the Sengoku Jidai. Besieged and surrounded by his enemies, a lord pays a group of men to see his only child to safety. But do they have the skill to ensure her safety? And can they even be trusted? For this is an age of honor and treachery, of blood and valor, of gold and steel. Now available at studiobrainstorm.net and Smashwords. Links in the description. Every story has its iconic moments or images. In the case of Dune, there are usually two of these. The first is anything involving the sandworms. The second is the scene where the Reverend Mother tests Paul Atreides with the Gom Jabbar. No matter what else may be cut from the film for the sake of adaptation or runtime, every version of Dune includes this scene, whether it's the David Lynch film, the 2000s sci-fi miniseries, or the Denis Villeneuve film. There are a few reasons why this is so. For one thing, this scene features one of the most quoted lines in the entire Dune saga, apart from "The spice must flow," the Bene Gesserit litany against fear. Or at least the first few lines of it anyway.
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer.
The second is that, in many ways, this scene essentially sets up and establishes both the tone and the themes of Dune itself. But first things first, the test itself. The whole reason for the Reverend Mother testing Paul is to find out whether or not he may be the Kwisatz Haderach. You see, Paul's mother Jessica, herself a Bene Gesserit, is very much in the doghouse with her fellow sisters, as she essentially threw a monkey wrench into 10,000 years worth of eugenics by giving Duke Leto a son instead of a daughter. Despite this, Jessica chose to train Paul in the Bene Gesserit way. The Sisterhood knows this, and that's why they choose to administer the test. After all, the idea of the Kwisatz Haderach is that he will essentially be a male Reverend Mother, a man who, for the first time in thousands of years, can survive drinking the deadly water of life and unlocking his other memory. The test itself is comprised of two elements, the Gom Jabbar itself and a box. The Gom Jabbar is essentially just a poisoned needle. The Reverend Mother calls it the high-handed enemy, which seems to imply that it's far more sophisticated and civilized than, say, stabbing someone or shooting them. The poison itself is so deadly that a single prick means instant death. The box itself works through nerve induction. Essentially, it stimulates the nerve endings of whatever appendage you stick into the box in order to simulate intense pain. As to the test itself, well...
The test is simple. Remove your hand from the box, and you die.
What's in the box?
Pain.
I couldn't have put it better myself. The Reverend Mother is also helpful in describing the meaning and significance of the test.
I hold at your neck, a Gom Jabbar. This one kills only animals.
Are you suggesting a duke's son is an animal?
Let us say, I suggest you may be human. Your awareness may be powerful enough to control your instincts. Your instinct will be to remove your hand from the box.
In the context of the Gom Jabbar test, the animal refers to Paul's instincts, such as the instinct to remove his hand from the box and thus escape the pain. Meanwhile, the human refers to Paul's reason, the reason that tells him that if he removes his hand from the box to escape the pain, if he gives in to his instinct, then he will be killed, and so he must keep his hand in the box and endure the pain. All living things wish to continue living. As such, thanks to hundreds of millions of years of evolution, the connection between pain and death has been ingrained into the instincts of every animal species on Earth. With that context, the purpose of the Bene Gesserit test here is to force the subject into a situation where their instinct and their reason are in conflict. Instinct, because of the automatic association between pain and death, is screaming at Paul to remove his hand, to avoid the pain and thus avoid death. Meanwhile, obeying the Reverend Mother's instructions, Paul's reason is telling him that if he wishes to avoid death, he must not avoid the pain. By enduring the pain for as long as he does, longer than any other Bene Gesserit before him, Paul passes the test and is deemed human by the standards of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. As I said at the beginning of the video, this scene is thematically important, because here and now, Frank Herbert is expressing his answer to a question that thinkers great and small, past and present, have been wrestling with ever since the Enlightenment, especially those thinkers that lived in times of revolution.
Here is man. Men make revolutions. So first we must determine man's nature.
What is the nature of man? It seems such a simple question, and yet it asks us to contemplate the totality of the human race and describe what exactly it is that makes us human. For the sake of simplicity, I will break this down into 3 still broad but more specific questions. 1. Is man's nature fixed or changeable? 2. Is man's nature inherently good or evil? 3. Relevant to the Gom Jabbar test, is man's nature inherently one of reason, i.e. rational thought, or passion, i.e. instinct and emotion? I frame the question this way so that it can be specific enough to allow for a simple answer, but also be broad enough to allow for a complicated answer. This is relevant because, on the surface, Dune is a simple story of a chosen one fulfilling his destiny. But anyone who's actually read the book will tell you that Dune, either on its own or in the context of the Dune saga as a whole, is deeply philosophical, and philosophy very rarely allows for simple answers.
I believe that man, uncorrupted by government, is reasonable. I believe in the certain progress of mankind through the development of the human mind. Men have only to be given the chance to think. They will neither act unwisely nor be misled. In short, I believe in the power and inevitable triumph of reason.
Belief in the goodness and perfectibility of man is in the very air we breathe. It is a philosophy that has been persuasively spread by Rousseau and Paine here. But it is a false doctrine. From my observation, man is governed not by reason, but by passion. He is full of ambition, greed, and fear. Being a man, I love men. Yet if I depended on man's benevolence, I would have been destroyed long ago.
These are just 2 of the many different kinds of answers that people can have to this one question. And when you think about it, you realize how much our perception of human nature is a foundation for what we believe, whether it's about humanity, the world, morality, or society.
With such contradictory views of mankind, how is man to be governed?
As little as possible. In a free society, each man is his own governor.
Liberty must be limited in order to be enjoyed. Society requires that the inclinations of men should frequently be controlled. This can only be done by a power outside themselves, by government strong enough to govern.
And just because you have different answers, that doesn't mean you will have divergent conclusions. For example, you might say democracy is good because if you believe humans are beings of reason, then everyone deserves to have a say. On the opposite end, you might say that democracy is good because if you believe humans are beings of passion, it is good that democracy dilutes power, so that the passions of one person or group of persons does not run roughshod over their fellows. If the Gom Jabbar test is in fact a representation of Frank Herbert's views on human nature, it seems that he takes a middle road between the 2 extremes. He seems to be implying that man is normally a creature of passion, and thus little different from the animals. He only separates himself from the animal kingdom and becomes human when he exercises reason. Passion, by its very nature, is unthinking, automatic, and instinctive. To use reason is to make a conscious choice. And in the most extreme cases, It is a conscious choice to deny our passions. And this is important, as in many ways this ties into the main messages that Frank Herbert is trying to get across to us in Dune. When we choose to let our passions rule us, when we choose not to think, when we choose simply to react, even if that reaction is simply complacence, that is when we allow charismatic people to lead us into folly. That is when we become neglectful of the environment and the world around us. And that is when we become overly reliant on our strengths and neglect to re-examine our weaknesses and failings. In a way, when we read or watch or play a story, the creator of that story is telling us something about themselves by explaining what they think of at least an aspect of human nature. For example, in my own dystopian novel Inferior, one of the ideas behind it is the way that people have a tendency to tear others down rather than seek to build themselves up. And I'm a nobody. All of the great figures in science fiction have created amazing stories and universes by expressing their opinion on at least some aspect of human nature. Gene Roddenberry believed that humans have the ability to cast aside their negative qualities and become the best of themselves. Thus, the Federation in Star Trek is about as close to utopia as sci-fi ever gets. By contrast, people like Ridley Scott and Philip K. Dick feared that we will never be able to leave behind our base qualities like greed or complacency, and so their futures not only have mega-rich corporate elites ruling over an impoverished mass, but that our over-reliance on technology has led to our own dehumanization. Robert Heinlein believed that humans only value things when they have to work for it. And so in Starship Troopers, you can only vote by putting in 2 years of federal service. Jules Verne argued that man has a burning desire for freedom, and so Captain Nemo builds the Nautilus and lives beneath the waves, severing himself from any human authority other than his own. Mary Shelley feared that we would become so enamored of logic and reason that we would become arrogant, lose our respect for things like God or nature, and start tampering with things that we really ought not to. And George Lucas believed that no matter how dark and cynical the times may get, goodness and heroism can still be found anywhere, in an unassuming farm boy, a selfish smuggler, or even a fallen knight. And that is why the Gom Jabbar scene is so significant and so memorable. Because in this moment, whether in print or on a screen, Frank Herbert is expressing himself to us, and doing so, like all great artists, in a clever and memorable way. We already know that director Denis Villeneuve is including this scene in the Dune film, a film that we all hope will be good enough to form the basis of a Dune film franchise. Let's hope that he also understands the meaning behind the scene. Until then.